Good morning to everyone. How is everyone doing so far? I mean, has this been inspirational or what? I mean, this is like what we all need, right? And as hard as it was to get here this morning, how great it is that we did it for ourselves. This is taking care of ourselves and taking care of the world. So thank you all for being here. So great to be here. And thank you to my panelists for taking the time and making the effort to be here. We're so excited to hear from you. Thank you. So without further ado, because we're running, we started late, which Mielle is already like, you know, I can see her, I can see it, I can see in her eyes, she's already worried.
I'm a Virgo.
So I have the honor of introducing the panelists. I'm just going to keep it brief. Please check out their bios because they are incredible women. So to my right is Carrie Goldberg. She's the founder of CA Goldberg PLLC, a law firm. It's a nationally renowned law firm that represents survivors of gender-based violence online and offline. She's also the author of 2019 New York Times Editor's Choice book, Nobody's Victim, Fighting Psychos, Stalkers, Pervs, and Trolls. So we're so happy to have you here, Carrie. Thanks for being here. And then to her right is Staci Rubin. And Staci is VP of Environmental Justice at the Conservation Foundation, Law Foundation, CLF. And she partners with residents of historically marginalized communities to solve some of our biggest environmental challenges. Partners, that's such a great thing. And then we also have with us Michelle Gitlitz, who is the GC and Corporate Secretary of Flexa Network, Inc. And that is a global leader in pure digital payments. So we are so happy to have you here. For Michelle, she got COVID earlier this week. She tested positive, and she said, but I'm going to be here virtually. So thank you so much, Michelle, for taking the time and for managing. You look great. You look fantastic, I have to say.
Thank you. A little bit of makeup can do wonders.
Yeah. So anyway, so we're going to dive right in, and you know, one of the things that we're thinking about in terms of our theme and leadership is, and this kind of builds on something that Justice Marshall said too, is leaders, when you are in a space, you know, those individuals who are in a space where they are actually creating the space, right? They look around and there's no one in that space to guide them or tell them, oh, this is how it's been, this is what you need to do, this is the way to go, because we know we've been there and we've been doing it for years. No, their spaces are spaces that they had to create, step into, and make themselves. And that is so inspiring and so incredible what they've done. And so we get the pleasure of hearing how they've done it in their respective spaces. So Michelle, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind, and tell us a little bit about how you got into where you are now and how you created your own space.
Sure. Thank you so much. And it's really a privilege to be here. And I'm so sorry that I can't be in person and be in community with everyone. But of course, we want to take safety precautions. So when you say, how do you get into a space when there's, you know, no one like you in that space and there's no one really to turn to for that entree? I think it focuses most around confidence, capabilities, believing in yourself, and being someone who wants to do something different and do something disruptive, even if that exact moment, that's not what you're thinking. In 2015, I just sort of randomly went to a cocktail party where a bunch of people who were in the hedge fund secondary market trading industry were socializing. I, at the time, was a securities litigator and regulatory lawyer. And these people were talking about crypto and mining and Ethereum and blockchain. And they actually never use the word crypto. They only said Ethereum, Bitcoin and blockchain. I had no idea what they were talking about. And I just listened and I heard this passion about these individuals, most of whom were men, to be honest, speaking about how blockchain and Ethereum and Bitcoin were going to change the way that we viewed money, how this new technology was going to disintermediate and remove the middlemen, like the banks, like the escrow agents. And I found it really interesting as a financial services lawyer. And it piqued my curiosity because I had graduated from college around the time that the internet sort of fully came to fruition. I got my first email address when I went to college. And was using AOL Messenger and dialing into Netscape with a phone cable. But by the time I graduated from college, email was pervasive and we were using the internet for lots of searches. And at that time, I didn't consider myself particularly brave or disruptive, and I was just going to go through a very traditional path. But in 2015, I think I must have been, I don't know, in my late 30s. I thought, well, this is really interesting, and I don't want to sit back and watch this next, what I saw to be an economic revolution occurring and be on the sidelines. So I read a lot and I studied a lot, and I went to a lot of meetups, in-person meetups in Brooklyn warehouses and in Washington. And I just asked a lot of questions, and no one looked like me. No one was a female lawyer without any coding or computer science background. But what struck me was how generous people were with their knowledge about someone who just had mere curiosity. People love to talk about themselves, and they love to talk about things that interest them, and they love to feel like you are really interested in them. So I figured that was my way to learn. And I did. And after about a year, I said, well, I think I can launch a practice. And the firm I had been practicing at said, yeah, we're doing a little bit of that, and sure, you can join our group. And that turned into, a practice that focused mostly on payments, because there were a lot of initial coin offerings, which to me looked like securities offerings, and a lot of regulatory non-compliant things going on in the ecosystem. But I thought fundamentally people were going to want to spend this crypto. And so I launched my practice, and the rest is sort of history.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks. That's great. So Carrie, why don't we move to you? You can tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are right now.
Sure. It's so good to be here. I'm so sad Michelle's not
I know.
We all, 5 of us gals, got really tight from one phone call. We're very bonded.
Yeah.
We're missing a link here.
Yeah.
It's such a wonderful event, and I've been wanting to come for a few years now.
Yes.
It just hasn't all made up. Okay, so I own a victims' rights law firm, and we do a lot of big, beautiful cases against tech companies and against really powerful predators, and have been in practice. I've had the firm for 8 years, and we're a team of 12. There are seven of us are attorneys, and I have my dream job. But I definitely was not a straightforward path getting here. I never, growing up, I never wanted to be a lawyer. When I was a lawyer, I was never somebody who wanted to have a law firm, but just one thing happened, and here I am doing my life's work. And I truly believe that anybody could be doing their life's work. I came about this from a very low and disempowered point. I was when I first started practicing, I wanted to go into human rights, because before law school I went to law school at night, and during law school I worked for Nazi victims, and I wanted to go into human rights because I was working a lot with reparations and was just clobbered by the idea that there was money that was paid for injuries and how crude and disproportionate the money recoveries were for people who'd suffered so much. But then I wasn't a good student particularly, and I kept having to put the net further and further out when I was looking for a job. And it ended up being a good thing because I got a job in nonprofits working at a nonprofit that did landlord tenant work, representing low-income people who've been evicted. And so immediately I was just thrown into court. I was litigating, I was arguing motions, I was doing hearings and responding to these emergency situations. And after I did that for a few years, I went back working with elderly people at the Bureau Institute. And about 4 years into that, I had a terrible breakup with somebody who then started blackmailing me. And he had naked pictures and videos of me that he then was, he would send to me on email and tell me that he had blind copied people. And in New York, I quickly learned that there was nothing illegal about what he was doing. And when I tried to get an order of protection, I really struggled finding a lawyer who could help me. He started making false police reports, and he tried to get an order of protection against me and was doing all sorts of other really scary stalking and harassing things. And I had to get, one lawyer to help me with the criminal stuff, another lawyer to help me with the family stuff. And the family court judge said that this guy had a constitutional right to express himself through my naked pictures. And all the lawyers that I was working with, basically, they were good lawyers, but this was a really aberrational case for them. And so it felt really scary. And when I finally got to the other side of it, I got my order of protection. He pled guilty and the criminal stuff against me was withdrawn. I mean, that was a hellish experience. Every part of my life was different. It was expensive. I had to move to get more security. My family was pissed at me because they had gone after them. I was at like the lowest point of my life, but I also felt like I'd gotten this education into this other world of the law. And I quit my very secure nonprofit job, and with the $3,000 payout of vacation days, I started a law firm. And the thing is that the only for those of us in the room who are lawyers, I mean, it's probably the cheapest business to start because you've already paid for the really expensive inventory. You need, and so, truly for $3,000, you can get a website, you can get a phone, you can get some business cards, you can get some letterhead. And people, it's much more intimidating to think about it, but if you start to break it down, it's just like the things you need to do to start. It's actually, but the gift that was given to me though was that I was in such a niche. I said, okay, I'm an internet privacy lawyer. And I never worked a law firm before. So I didn't really know how one ran, but I just, which I think is a gift also. But I then reached out to some different local magazines, and there was a magazine called Brooklyn Magazine, and I said, I'm starting a law firm. We specialize in revenge porn and internet privacy. And 2 weeks later, there was a spread about me, and I was called the revenge porn lawyer. And when it was talk about imposter syndrome, I was called an expert in this field. But then I looked around and there was really no one else in the field. And so I was like, oh, okay, fake it till you make it. and then I was just doing a lot of free, like pro bono cases and still was getting some hourly work from the Vera Institute. And one thing led to another, and there was more articles, and I started getting cases, and then I got my first big case where we did this big settlement against a tech company, and then I was able to hire and scale up. But you know, now like life is really great. You know, I've got a case against Snap. I'm gonna go argue a motion against Amazon in a week. You know, we've got big, beefy, horrific cases that and we're getting results. But it started from a place of great despair.
Well, yeah, and that touches on the when things fall apart theme that Lillian referenced with Justice Margaret Marshall, and you know, saying that things are going to fall apart, and what are you going to do? And you certainly you did a huge thing, but it was putting one foot in front of the other, basically.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and it's really very rewarding to be. I mean, our clients are really suffering. They're people who be blackmailed, whose nude images are posted. We represent a lot of children. We represent parents whose children were killed because of something bad that happened on the internet. There's a lot of suffering, but it's also really the most joyful thing to have a law degree and to know that, okay, well, I'm never going to take away this person's pain. I'm never going to be able to undo what happened to them, but I know how this legal system works. And I know that for the price of $200, I can buy an index number and I can sue whoever should be held responsible for this, or I can get an order of protection and make it so that this offender will never contact them again. Or I will, you know, send a demand letter to this attacker or this employer and get a lot of money from my client, which helps, you know, makes life better.
Yes, yeah, that's really powerful. Yeah, thanks, Carrie, for sharing that. Okay, Staci, on to you.
A very hard act to follow.
Yeah.
This is such an amazing panel of people. So I have had a deep commitment and passion to environment as it intersects with public health and justice. And I came to Northeastern Law School knowing that I wanted to come out and do that kind of work. I thought it was going to take me, you know, maybe 10 or 15 years into my career to do it. And I was lucky enough that my last co-op at Northeastern became my first job. So just about a 20-minute walk here from the law school is an amazing community-based organization, Alternatives for Community and Environment. And I became an environmental justice attorney. And I had the absolute privilege of working with people who were looking to convert these vacant lots with, you know, really, really toxic amounts of lead and other contaminants in their soil and transform that into community gardens. So about a year and a half into my career, I was one of 2 attorneys. And my senior attorney, who I looked up to, my mentor, left the organization, and we didn't fundraise enough money to replace him with a second attorney. So I was on my own, you know, a year and a half into my career, which was pretty scary. So I had a group of residents that I adored and wanted to do everything in my power to work with. And they said, there's like a Fortune 500 company who wants to transport large amounts of highly flammable material by rail. They want to change their operations, grow what they're doing, and they wanted to bring you know, millions of gallons of ethanol on subway tracks through Chelsea, Massachusetts, Revere, Massachusetts, communities of color, low-income areas, lots of limited English proficient residents. And I had no idea what I was doing. So I remember, you know, appealing a permit, and I saw opposing counsel, and his suit cost more than at least 5 months of my salary, if not more. And through a series of, you know, permit challenges, we went to the legislature, we held rallies, we worked with residents to help them figure out how to fight back. And we won. We got a phone call from opposing counsel saying, we're withdrawing our proposal, we're not doing this. And that was a pretty big miracle. That was just an awesome victory. And I was like, I wanna keep doing this for as long as I can. Fast forward a few years, and I decided to become a foster mom. And that was pretty overnight. It was a pretty quick turnaround. And I decided I couldn't do my job and parent the way I wanted to parent and do the job the way I wanted to do the job. So I said, I need a job that I care less about. And I went to state government, to the Department of Public Utilities. And I will say, in all of their defense, I ended up loving the job. I found out pretty quickly that I was the only one with the viewpoint that I had, and was able to sort of learn how utility regulation works and how to integrate my perspective. And so that was fabulous. And then a few years after that, I got a phone call from my current employer, Conservation Law Foundation, saying, we've got this job opening, we'd love to have you. And I've been there for 3.5 years. About a year ago, I got promoted into the sort of directing our environmental justice program. And it's really, I want to say, I don't think this is a new area of the law. This has been going on for, you know, more than a generation. And I think the way that the environmental world is right now, they understand that there's an intersection with energy. They understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion is clear. And the voice that I bring is, I don't walk into the room with solutions. I walk into the room and I listen, and I want to partner with people who are impacted first and worst by the climate crisis, and we're going to do it together. And so I think that's a view that not enough people share in the legal world, in the nonprofit world, but I'm really excited to be doing the work.
That's so great. Yes, listen, listen, listen. I'm just gonna quote Justice Margaret Marshall for the next week. Listen, listen, listen is what she said. So that's fantastic. Thanks, Staci. And you just started a class, right? You're at Northeastern, and your students
Yes,
here?
yes, the students are here. Yes, it's really
Oh, that's great. So what's the class?
energy law and policy, and I was very clear about my personal bias early on in the class this morning, and thrilled that they could be here. But yeah, we're looking at the energy sector, and in particular the climate justice aspects. How do we understand what the energy sector looks like? How are people impacted, and how do we change it so that we can address the climate crisis in an equitable way?
Excellent. Well, we're so happy that you could be here this morning. I know it was your first day of teaching. Basically, when we asked her, she was like, well, I'm supposed to teach a class. So we said, bring the class. So that was great. All right, thanks. Well, so let's dive in a little deeper. I think when we were talking, on our call, we were kind of preparing for this panel. One of the common themes that emerged was legislation, and how critical legislation is for the work that the three of you do, and how in some instances you've had to step up and create and work toward the legislation, creating legislation that would help you in your work. So if you could all kind of speak to that piece of it, and to give us a flavor too of sort of more the nitty-gritty of the work that you're doing in the course of your day-to-day. So I don't know who wants to. Michelle, do you want to start?
I thought maybe Carrie could start first.
Yeah, that works well.
Yeah.
Carrie,
Okay. Yeah. So I never expected to be like doing like legislation stuff. I'm a litigator, and I love the idea that just like one attorney and one client can actually make case law and change things that way. And it's only when I get cases, or my own personal experience have been, the doors shut because there's no legislation, that I've become aware of, okay, well, what needs to change. And when I first started my practice, there were only 3 states that criminalized the non-consensual dissemination of somebody else's naked pictures. Revenge porn. And so I didn't have any clients that first year. And so I spent most of my time just like writing these letters to lawmakers in New York State, and then in other states, and testifying in other states, and then participating federally in getting revenge porn legislation. Just telling them what this problem was, because it wasn't really in the vernacular. No one really knew about it. The people that were leading the country and the state didn't know about it. And so the legislation was a really big part of my job, because I can protect one client with the work that I do, or if I make case law, I can protect a larger number of people. But legislation, I mean, when we finally got legislation in New York, which was like the 47th state to get revenge porn legislation, I mean, that's a 20 million person impact. And now I'm working on legislation in New York that expands the number of people, or the people who can get orders of protection. So in my practice, the most powerful thing that we can help people do is get an order of protection. Someone's bothering you and harassing you and threatening you, you should be able to go to family court and get an order of protection. And in most states, you can do that, but in New York, you have to either be related to the offender or they have to be a former sex partner. And with the internet, of course, people are stalked by coworkers and former roommates and their partner's ex, and and just people that become obsessed with them online. And so that's one area of legislation. And then one other thing I have to talk about, because it relates to Northeastern, is so I sue tech companies. And I used to work collaboratively with them to help sometimes to get them to change their policies to outlaw things like revenge porn and stuff. And now I exclusively have an adversarial relationship with them. Cooperative up until about 2016. We got some good policies, and now it's just exclusively adversarial. And I quickly learned that that tech companies are immune from liability for things that users do to other users on their platforms because of the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, which you probably know about. And in 2016, I got a case of a man who was being harassed and by his ex-boyfriend, who was creating profiles on the dating app Grindr. And so I sued Grindr. I said, you have to ban this person. I need you to, I got a judge to restrain the Grindr so that this guy would stop impersonating my client, because strangers were coming to my client's home, to his job, like 23 times a day, like for sex. Like can you imagine like the doorbell ringing 3 times, like since we started this, and a stranger would be there for sex. And Grindr said that they couldn't ban a user. And so we sued them for product liability, saying you've got to defectively design product. If you have a hookup app that does not have the technology to exclude the very foreseeable danger of somebody weaponizing it to stalk or harass or something. And so I had a friend who was a professor here, Woodrow Hartzog, and
Yeah, Woody.
He's been, since the start of my law firm, he's been very helpful and a sounding board with some of the things about big tech and product design. And he invited me here, and we mooted the case. We lost the case at the lower court, and then we were appealing it to the Second Circuit because the trial judge had said no, there's no this Grindr's totally protected by Section 230. And so I have such a soft spot because the students at Northeastern gave me so many good ideas that we used for the Second Circuit. Anyways, so we lost the Second Circuit, petition for writ, at Supreme Court, lost at every step. But then along the way, the theory has taken off, and it just succeeded against Snap in the Ninth Circuit, and I just had a success against a platform called Omegle in Oregon District Court, and so it's like another thing, just like like you can fail, and it's not, you can lose, but it's not a failure, and like that theory is actually going to revolutionize the tech industry, I feel, and make them more responsible to their users, because we're going to start getting really big recoveries against the platforms, and we're going to have to moderate more responsibly. But I've become very, very active in reform in Section 230 and testifying about that too. That's way too much more than I want to hear from.
That's fantastic. How did you come up with the product liability theory? I mean, that was brand new, right?
It was, I'm not, you know what, I think it's just another thing about being an outsider. Like, I didn't take a products liability class in law school. I knew nothing about it, but I knew enough to know, well, this is a dangerous product. It's industry and commerce, and let me look at some cases. And so, like, I think if I'd been an expert in products liability, I would have talked myself out of it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so
Because most people who did know products liability were like, that's never gonna work. People that knew computers were like, that's never gonna work.
right.
And I was like, well, but we have to try the stuff and lose. And then the losses actually created a lot of pressure with legislators, because like, you know, people are so afraid of creating bad case law, but actually bad case law can push for legislative reform.
It's so interesting. It's kind of like when you said about the law, like you didn't know anything about starting a law firm, and it's kind of a gift. Like not being an expert can be.
It can be.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Okay, Staci, why don't we?
Do you want to have Michelle go and then?
Yeah. Okay, Michelle, are you good with that?
Sure.
Okay.
So I'm going to talk about legislation in two contexts. The first context, like Carrie, you know, when I got into crypto, I realized that there weren't really crypto specific laws. That, like, when the internet was first coming to fruition and being used, the laws that applied to the internet were the laws that applied to the telephone, which sounds totally ridiculous, but it took actually 5 years for internet specific laws to be enacted. Bitcoin was created in 2010 and it's 2022, and we still don't have crypto specific laws. I personally have been working with state and federal regulators since at least 2018. And while there's been lots of legislation proposed, we've not really had any pervasive legislation passed. The crypto market's in sort of a downward tailspin right now, which may actually be helpful from a legislative standpoint. But it's been a frustrating area, and to practice in an area where, you know, the law is vague and ambiguous can be problematic, especially when you're in private practice trying to give clients advice. And especially like now when I'm in-house and I'm trying to give my founders and my internal partners advice. But what I'd really like to talk about is the impact that Carrie's had and Carrie's work has had on my life. I think sitting here today, we're meeting a lot of really influential women who have worked really, really hard to make a name for themselves in their various careers, notwithstanding obstacles of lack of funding, lack of education, lack of time because of parenting or other family responsibilities. And I experienced a very significant breakup at the beginning of January, where I ended an engagement with my former fiance after 3.5 years. And when I wouldn't give him some money and property that he claimed that I owed him, he threatened to disseminate intimate images and pictures of me in the internet, saying, quote, "I think that the people in the crypto community would be really interested to see what you do in your free time, and I'm not going to walk away from this money." I was completely dumbfounded when I heard that. And like Carrie, that's somebody who you're once in an intimate relationship with, who you had feelings for, and who you're no longer with, could not only threaten you with extortion, but also try to destroy your career and everything that you've worked for and built because of something you did in your private life, over which they are trying to, as most, I think, sexual abusers do, take your control away from you. And I hung up the conversation and I called my lawyer, and we didn't know about the revenge porn laws. We thought he's just trying to extort me, and he's a lawyer, so, you know, probably there's some ethical violations. But after my lawyer called me back, he said, you know, there are New York State and New York City statutes that civilly and criminally make, you know, illegal the mere threat, not even the dissemination, but the mere threat of it. And I was just wowed about that. But it also, what I wanted, because I didn't know Carrie existed until we met on this panel, I really just wanted a temporary restraining order to restrain him from coming near me and to restrain him from disseminating those videos. And so I had to sue him in New York State court publicly and put in filings that this happened to me. I had to tell the founders of my project that, you know, these are going to be public documents and this might get some press because people know who I am. And thank goodness my founders and my project were really supportive. And thank goodness thus far, though I don't completely feel I'm in, you know, a safe place with this, but the press didn't pick up the story. But it was really horrible. And if Carrie hadn't done her work, and it's frightening to think that New York was the 47th state to enact legislation, like I would not have had that protection that I so desperately needed. And when Carrie talks about, you know, weaponization and cost, it has cost me so much money to hire a lawyer, to have these papers drafted. And then in retaliation, you know, in opposition to my motion for a restraining order, my ex-fiance lied and said that I filed my case to gain leverage to steal $70,000 from him, which I don't need to steal from him. And then, and then he sued me again in New Jersey to create more legal expense for me so that I would have to prosecute my case in New York and defend myself in New Jersey, where we had had a shared home. And so these men, and some of them who are lawyers, you know, weaponize their legal degrees and their money and their power against us successful women who most of us have not had the most easy, you know, trajectory in male dominated industries or with lack of resources. But thank goodness to Carrie, because at least I had a remedy.
So thank you, Michelle. You know, Carrie, do you want to say anything about that? I mean, this is, you can imagine, we were on our call preparing, and this all came out on the call, and Michelle was brave enough to share it with us, and she's sharing it with us all today, which we so appreciate, Michelle. Really, really do. And so we were all pretty shook to our core on the prep call, and Michelle said she wanted to share it with all of us today because of the huge impact that Carrie's work, you know, directly had, you know, on her life. So meaningful. So
thank you, Carrie.
Well, I want to thank you, Michelle, for sharing all of that with everybody, and also just that gives me meaning, and it just makes the hustle, you know, and the struggle getting that stuff, it makes it purposeful, and you are somebody who deserves to be protected. Everybody who's been able to take advantage of those laws is somebody whose privacy and future and present and safety all deserve to be protected. And I'm so eager for you to get on the other side of this situation. because it stops right now and we went to the store.
Well, thank you. And, you know, if there's one message I can communicate, because a lot of people have said to me, well, why don't you just give them the money and the property? You know, like, what do you need this hassle for? And at some point I had to turn to myself and I had to say, because I won't be bullied and I won't be extorted and I won't be intimidated and I won't be threatened. And people need to be held accountable for what they do, and it's wrong. And I do have the money to fight it, and I do have the energy to fight it. And it's given me a different kind of purpose to want to support Carrie's work, to want to create a safe place for other female lawyers to say, this happened to me. What can I do? What resources do I have? Is this going to completely ruin my career if I don't give in? And my answer, at least for me, is no, it's not. It's actually going to show that you're a stronger person, because good lawyers don't back down and they fight for their clients. And sometimes your client is yourself and you have to fight for yourself, which I think is what me and Carrie did. And there's one thing I just want to mention that Staci said, because I think that looking at her story about when the big company, you know, called her and said they pulled the application for the permit, that was because you organized and you made noise and you caused them to pull that permit, not because you got lucky, but because you thought to yourself, even though I don't know what I'm, you know, 100% doing here, intuitively, I know this community doesn't want this. So what's the grassroots thing that I can do to facilitate putting pressure? And public pressure, I think, can be the most important tool that any of us have. And that's why I think what you did in that situation with the permit, what Carrie does about, you know, publicizing her work and writing books, and hopefully what I'm doing by speaking here today is creating more community, more safe places where we can feel good about talking, doing, acting.
Thank you. This fills me with joy, this idea of us all being here and sharing with each other and learning from each other, and the strength that we can draw from people who are incredibly courageous, like you, Michelle. It's just, it's really special. That's all I can say. All right, Staci, so when so let's
What did that happen first?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for directing that. So Staci, talk to us about, you know, what, you know, dive a little deeper into your legislative efforts.
Yes, and I really appreciate, Michelle, you mentioning the organizing. So one of the areas of legislation that I'm most proud of is work that was 20 years in the making, including, you know, before my time. So last March in Massachusetts, we got the first environmental justice statute, and it's one of the strongest environmental justice laws in the country. And that didn't just happen. So that was an effort after numerous failed attempts over time, some of which I was a part of, some I was not. In 2019, at the beginning of the last legislative session, there were over 20 bills filed that had the name environmental justice in there, and none of them were a result of what residents of what I would consider to be environmental justice communities had written. So I talked to a number of the women that I knew and said, I think we should start our own coalition and take charge of this. And so we formed the Massachusetts Environmental Justice Table. And it's co-convened by 5 grassroots organizations: the North American Indian Center of Boston, Green Roots, Coalition for Social Justice, Alternatives for Community and Environment, my alma mater, so to speak, and Neighbor to Neighbor. And so I've been, you know, providing, you know, legal guidance and partnership, and we drafted a new bill that requires all environmental review projects to really consider environmental justice it requires a developer of a power plant facility, for example, to be engaging with the people who are potentially impacted by that facility before even filing with any agency, before trying to get any approvals. Because the problem is typically, you know, there's a proposal to bring a train full of flammable material that's really hazardous, and nobody in the community finds out until the project is designed, it's been funded. It's like the last step is when the community maybe gets notified if they read the legal print of the newspaper. You know, so now the idea is that communities get the information first, early, they can influence the design, the decision, and then ideally can prevent some litigation down the road. But if not, we're here to do the litigation. But you know, so we were successful in pushing legislators, in pushing the public narrative that we needed an environmental justice statute. COVID-19 happened after all of these bills were filed and we did our rewrite. And the COVID-19 data showed that the majority of places with COVID-19 high rates and mortality were in communities that had long-term exposure to air pollution. So we made that link and we said, this is one reason why we need this legislation to pass. And we had one particular state senator who was really opposed to the legislation and is high up and one of the key decision makers. And we were able to work around him and we were able to get that into law. And this session, we're now fighting to get energy facility siting reform passed. Because again, when you've got an electrical substation, in our class, we were talking about this earlier, if you're trying to get a new intrastate transmission line or a pipeline sited, you know, really there's not a good scenario where the community's voice is heard, is considered, is integrated. So we want to change who's on the decision-making board. We want an Indigenous representative, an environmental justice community representative on that board that makes that decision. We want there to be these cumulative analyses. Don't just look at where the substation or the power plant is and within the fence. We want to know what are the other very polluting facilities nearby and what is the impact for this particular community. So we've had some legislative successions. We're working on more, and it's a thrilling process. But to get legislation passed, it's such a slog. Anybody who's worked on it, it is never ending. You never know if you're going to succeed. We've got an environmental justice bill in Vermont that our organization's been heavily involved with. It's made it through the House, the Senate, 5 years in the making. It's on the governor's desk and we're waiting to see what happens. So I'm hoping that we've got sort of the second, or that's actually going to be one of the strongest, stronger than Massachusetts if it passes. So lots of really good work. My vision is that we've got strong environmental justice laws in every single location, every single state, and that our energy facility siting is done in a dramatically different way. So we're partially through to my vision. We've got a ways to go, but all of it is done in partnership with people most impacted.
That's so impressive.
Thank you.
Feel the energy coming from you. Like I've never heard anyone say, "Oh, it's such a slog," and look so like energetic. Where to go? It's amazing. It makes me feel really good that you're doing what you're doing. So thank you for that. So we are, winding down, but I'd love to take a couple questions. We do have time for that, and listen some from the audience. Oh, I see Kelly's hand up. Kelly.
Hi, everybody. Kelly Douglas, class of '92. So I have, let's see, 2 comments. I don't know, 1 question and a comment. Michelle, at some point, I'd like to know if the X is in the process of being disbarred or otherwise investigated by the bar authorities for committing a crime. Carrie, totally blown away by you. And I'm going to say, as somebody who's well advanced in my career, I thought, oh, maybe I'll skip this panel because I don't need to know about a new area of law. Guess what? I loved it. Everybody here, I hope you're going to order her book. Yeah. I just heard it's on sale. And here's the bad news. All of us, so I'm an employment lawyer, deal with this stuff. I'm a parent. I'm sorry to say, I think I'm going to have to know how to deal with this stuff. We're all moving about in a world where a lot of this garbage is going to be happening. So let's, buy Carrie's book. learn, educate ourselves in our communities. And last, I'm just gonna lift up for a minute before the break, halfway through the conference, and say that this panel really embodies what the conference is about, right? We all are gonna take different little gems away. I had somebody next to me say, Kelly, I've been coming to this conference for years. I always leave it and I end up in tears over the weekend because I'm so inspired by the women here, and I realize I'm not leading that life. Guess what? That person left her job after 20 plus years, is incredibly happy. And my point is, you guys are all planting, everything you say that inspires any of us, whether we're a new lawyer or like me, towards the end of a career, you're still inspiring, you're still planting seeds. We will all go out and further inspire and plant those seeds. So thank you.
Oh my gosh, Kelly, that was like, we didn't even plan that. That was like, so yeah, I think we have time for one more. If you want to follow Kelly, if you dare, but as just as much as be courageous, speak up.
We never heard about the X.
Oh, yeah, is he being too far from that? Or,
Well, when there is a pending litigation, there are certain things that happen in the ordinary course or happen afterwards. So I'll just leave it at that.
fair enough. We can tell you're on it. You go.
Yes.
Hi. I just have a very practical question. What are your tips for flying into a future that no one can advise you on and actually making plans in the process?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I'm happy to start and just say, create a vision, be prepared to change it innumerable times. Listen a lot to other people around you who are impacted by whatever the issue is, and trust your gut. I can't tell you how many times I've been against people who are far more experienced and have so much more money, and that always makes me question myself. And I always stay in the room, I always stay engaged, and it's paid off more times than it has.
I would add that when you say planning, I think you can only plan for yourself. In my situation, I was a service partner at a big law firm, which means that I was going to be beholden to my rainmaking partner for my success. And I decided that I didn't want to be a service partner. I wanted to find a way to generate my own business. So crypto was my way to plan for myself. I didn't know if it was going to work. I just knew what I wanted. So I think you can only really control what you want and not any external factor. And a little bit of ignorance to, piggyback on what Carrie said. Like, if I'd really known how complicated crypto law was, like, maybe I wouldn't have done it. But once I was in it, it didn't seem as complicated. And I think the third thing is, you don't have to know everything. It's okay to say, thanks for asking me that question, I'll have to get back to you. Or as most of us litigators like to do, I'm just going to answer the question I want to answer, not the one. So it's really a matter of, I think, planning for yourself and having your own confidence and maybe a little bit of the faking it till you make it.
Yeah. And I'll add that it's like having a baby. You're never going to be totally ready. So don't worry about, don't overplan, just jump in. Read a few books that, if you're planning on starting a business or a firm or a nonprofit, just read a couple books. You don't need some sort of 5-year grand plan or grand vision or all this, budget stuff for the next 3 years. You don't have to figure out how to, hire for the next half decade. You just need to basically pay for yourself for the next 3 months while you figure out how to scramble up some money. And the good thing about hiring people is that you're paying them in 2-week installments, so you don't have to worry about getting someone's full salary. So, you know, you have to have some tolerance for risk. Another piece of advice is that when you're trying something new and you're jumping in, it's going to scare some of the people around you who want you to take a safer path. And so you also have to remember, you have to kind of identify the people who are going to be so scared about what you're doing that maybe they're not the best voices to be listening to. It might be people that are really, like, that really love you, but they might be a little too cautious for what you need to be hearing. And so I found that there's some people in my life who love me a lot that I don't really keep totally up to speed on, like, the exciting things ahead of me, because I think it would kind of freak them out a little bit. And they might kind of be like, are you sure?
Yes.
And my family, when I told them I wanted to start a law firm, they were like, well, maybe you could just like try doing it on nights and weekends. Your job, just try doing that, like on nights and weekends.
Like Weaversing shifts or something.
Yeah.
Just do law firm shifts.
Yeah.
Oh, well, this has been fantastic.